Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, April 18th. Today is the 195th day since the attacks by Hamas and other militant groups on the southern part of Israel. I wanted to give an update. I cannot recall if I mentioned in my update yesterday that the Washington Post has a report of the killing of the 6-year-old little girl, Hind Rajab, her death in Gaza several weeks ago. The Washington Post report is an analysis of what happened. She's the little girl that called emergency services, and they had her on the phone, I think for hours. And you read the article and it's heart-rending. And for days, the world waited to see if she was okay. She was in a car where her family was killed. The Israeli military said that they were nowhere near the incident. Ambulance workers had been sent to rescue her, 2 ambulance workers, and they were later found dead, and the ambulance had been hit by an explosive device. So the U.S. State Department is asking Israel for more information and is calling for a full investigation into the matter because the Washington Post report cast doubt on Israel's earlier report. Today, or in the last couple of days, the Treasury Department, it was today, officially announced new sanctions on Iran in response to its attack against Israel. The Biden administration seeks an economic rather than military response to the Iranian attack. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the administration's actions would degrade and disrupt the Iranian drone program that targeted civilian populations in Israel. You'll recall that there was one injury, a 7-year-old Bedouin girl who still is in critical condition. The sanctions also target steel production. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on more than 600 Iranian-related entities over the last 3 years, according to the State Department. Our actions make it harder and costlier at every turn for Iran to continue its destabilizing behavior, Yellen said in a statement. From the perspective of many Arab states, and certainly those that are aligned with Iran, but even those that are not, the attack on the consulate, which is presumed to have been done by the Israelis, is what would be considered the destabilizing behavior. That was on sovereign Syrian territory. Of course, the embassy, I suspect, would be considered Iranian territory. So this idea of the U.S. accountability seems very one-sided and contradictory and hypocritical from the perspective of many others in the world. The U.S. and Israel will hold a high-level virtual meeting today about a possible Israeli operation in Rafah. News reports came out at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was driving home from New York. Yesterday was day 4 of the Pilgrimage to Peace tour. We'll leave again early next week to Chicago. So I read the news at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was reported in some Arab news sources that the U.S. had brokered a deal where they would allow for Israel to go into Rafah and have their ground incursion in Rafah in exchange for Israel not counterattacking Iran. Now, Axios has said that that's not true. The U.S. and Israel have met to talk about a Rafah operation. The Biden administration is still concerned about that, according to reports, that it would lead to massive civilian casualties. The officials flatly denied reports that the Biden administration gave a green light for the operation in Rafah if Israel declined to strike Iran in retaliation for last weekend's unprecedented attack. So this is the second time leaders met, Israeli and U.S. leaders. An in-person meeting scheduled to take place this week was postponed because of the Iranian attack. And so that is an update in that regard. Behind the scenes, over the last several weeks, several low-level working groups have been meeting virtually to discuss the IDF's operational plans for Rafah, humanitarian protocols, according to U.S. officials. This is a working group. They've talked about slow operations in specific neighborhoods in Rafah that would be evacuated in advance rather than an all-out invasion of the entire city. One of the big questions, again, is that there are so many people, where would they go? And this idea that it could be so controlled to have evacuations, and often evacuations just don't work. People don't know that they're being evacuated. There's a lack of clarity. And so there are great concerns in that regard. The U.S. official a U.S. official has said there's been significant improvement in the humanitarian situation in Gaza since Biden issued his stark warning 2 weeks ago. The Israelis haven't reached all the goals set by the president, but there's a big improvement. And I'll just say I am not seeing it in the reports from humanitarian organizations. Show me one group that's on the ground, that's saying we've seen a great improvement. I shared in the Thursday briefing this morning, the numbers per day, or maybe I did this yesterday in the daily update, I can't remember. But the daily numbers of trucks, according to OSHA, are still at less than 250 trucks a day. That's less than 50%. 50%. Fine if you call that an improvement, but the needs are so desperate. You know, our Samantha Power has already said the USAID administrator, famine has reached North Gaza. So I just don't know what big improvement they're talking about. And we have to call our government accountable to just, let's define reality. You know, these kind of terms, that's a big improvement. We're, you know, bringing in 50% of what was not meeting the needs in the first place before October 7th, and the needs are so much greater now, is just not true. In terms of the Israel-Iran crisis, a senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander in charge of nuclear security said that Iran could review its nuclear doctrine amid Israeli threats, adding that they are ready to launch powerful missiles to destroy designated targets in Israel. If Israel dares to hit Iranian nuclear sites, it will hit back. Israel is unlikely to retaliate against Iran until after Passover. That begins on Monday. And the assassination of the top Iranian general in Damascus earlier this month had been planned for about 2 months in advance, according to documents obtained by the New York Times. In response to the Iranian attack, the US is taking action against actors involved in the drone program in Iran through steel industry and automobile companies, according to State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. The EU is also stepping up sanctions against Iran. The former Mossad intelligence chief, Peltiz, said in an interview with Sky News that Israel will retaliate and do so strongly, and that everything is on the table. There have been conversations about, will the response be, I can't remember the term, I had to look up all these military terms. Will it be a physical response in terms of actual attacks, or could it be something, there's a military word for it, but you know, could it be cyber attacks or something like that? In Gaza, the IDF said it concluded an operation that began last week to gain control of the Netzarim corridor. This is the road that stretches east to west in the middle of the strip, allowing the army to control the movement of Palestinians between the north and the south. This is deeply disconcerting because the fear is that the majority of the population, except for a few 100,000, are all in the south. And so this could leave room for, if the far right in Israel, you know, there are some, I think it's 15% of the population or something, that really feel strongly about resettling North Gaza. And so there are concerns that this Netzarim corridor, you know, would allow or could allow for that to happen, even though the US and many others are opposed. The US agreed to the Israeli plan for the military operation in Rafah in exchange for a limited response to Iran, according to an Egyptian source and the London-based Qatari newspaper Al Arabi Al Jadid. So Haaretz reported that today as well. A man-made famine is tightening its grip in Gaza, says the head of UNRWA. So there you have your significant improvement, US government. UNRWA accused the Israeli security forces of using torture to extract false confessions. This is the report published by the agency that was just published on Tuesday. The report talks about interrogations, attacks by dogs, threats of rape and murder. The IDF said it rejects claims that it coerces detainees into giving false confessions and allegations of systemic and deliberate abuse of detainees. UNRWA received a one-off $15 million donation from Algeria. The death toll in Gaza is now reported just under 34,000 people. The injury toll is at just under 76,800. The UN Security Council was set to vote today on whether or not Palestine would become a full member state, and it was expected that the US would veto this vote. This is significant. A huge conversation here in DC around this issue is that there's a mandate that the US would have to defund all of the United Nations programs if Palestine is accepted as a full member state. It was just reported 7 minutes ago, I think it's now 6 p.m. here in the United States, that the US did in fact veto that UN Security Council resolution, killing the bid for full UN membership. Our deputy ambassador to the UN said the US has worked vigorously and with determination to support Palestinian statehood in the context of a comprehensive peace agreement. The US supports direct negotiations. And so he went on and said other things. There's no guarantee that the path that the UN provides for Israel's security and future as a democratic state. There were unresolved questions as to whether the applicant meets the criteria to be considered a state, you know, and the US went on. In terms of the hostage ceasefire conversation, a senior member of the Hamas bureau told a Saudi newspaper that Hamas has not given up on a complete ceasefire in Gaza, and that negotiations have not reached a dead end, and Hamas has not abandoned talks. The US spokesperson Kirby said hostage negotiations are still an active effort. There's a proposal on the table. And he said, we encourage Hamas to take the proposal. So it still sounds like there is daylight between Hamas and Israel on negotiations. Qatar is reevaluating its role as a mediator in the talks between Israel and Hamas, according to their prime minister, citing concerns that its efforts are being undermined by politicians who are seeking to score points. Sheikh Mohammed did not identify the politicians by name. Finance Minister Smotrich in Israel is refusing to transfer 600 million shekels, about $160,000 from the war budget to improve infrastructure that would enable the expansion of humanitarian aid in Gaza. That's according to Haaretz. In Lebanon, we know that Israel attacked Hezbollah fighter jets in South Lebanon, and Lebanon's interior minister alleged that there was an abduction and killing of a Hezbollah-linked Lebanese currency exchanger at his home, or at least in a villa in a resort town earlier this month that was linked to Israeli operatives. And in the West Bank, Israeli security forces have stated that they have arrested an operative connected with ISIS, suspected of carrying out an attack in the future. Houthis connected or in Yemen, and Iranian intelligence ship linked to the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea left its usual location near the coast of Yemen and was seen in the Strait of Hormuz. And the ship is making its way to Iran's Bandar Abbas port, connecting the Houthis to Iran. I want to close with just a prayer that a friend shared with me in connection to the Gaza ceasefire pilgrimages. A pilgrimage is a sacred journey, a prayer with one's body, to a destination with the desire to turn one's heart to God and to share in God's heart with all of creation, and particularly those who are vulnerable around the world. May that be our prayer as we continue to work toward peace.